Well, take a look at these never-before-seen images of the actual cover sheets that Rumsfeld used on his top-secret intelligence briefings for President Bush, actually obtained by GQ. Look, this one quotes from the Old Testament book of Joshua, exhorting the Israelites to be brave and courageous. And then this one quotes the book of Ephesians, saying, quote, "Therefore, put on the full armor of God." Yet another image of battle there. David Sanger is chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times and joins us now. All right, David, we've seen some of these cover sheets. I know you write about them today. During they were talking about the early part of the Iraq War in 2003. It had these biblical quotations. What does that tell us about what Secretary Rumsfeld was attempting to accomplish? Why were they there?
You know, I don't think it tells us very much about Secretary Rumsfeld, Nora. I think that from everything we've been able to determine, both from reading the GQ article and then several people from the Pentagon who served in the Pentagon at that time I've spoken to, these appear to have been prepared by an intelligence unit that sent one of a number of different intelligence summaries to Secretary Rumsfeld and other senior officials of the Pentagon. But there's no indication that Secretary Rumsfeld had anything to do with placing these cover sheets with the biblical quotations on them. And in fact, several of his former aides said to me that he used to get quite annoyed and in some cases go into something of a rage if there were extraneous quotations, things like that, on the intelligence reports he received, because they said he wanted the raw intelligence. So I'm not quite sure what it tells us other than about the people who were preparing the reports.
Well, that's true, and it's not clear whether President Bush was reading these particular reports.
That's
but,
right.
David, it does raise real questions. Why include, in fact, bellicose passages from Scripture on intelligence reports? I mean, this mixing of religion and quotes that would suggest to justify some of the actions inside these reports. Shouldn't that raise real questions?
Oh, yeah, I think it does raise real questions, and it raises real questions about the people who were putting together the intel reports. And if it went on for very long, and it's hard to tell from these how long it did go on, it would raise real questions about whether or not the leadership of the Pentagon told somebody to stop on this. But I'm not sure. You know, as you read the GQ article, it would seem to leave the impression that this was part of the justification for war, and I'm not quite sure I'm persuaded on that point.
Well, let me ask you, too, about this, David, because you are one of the greatest reporters out there when it comes to this stuff. Of course, President Bush, a born-again evangelical, very religious in many ways, and he credits, of course, the Lord and his religion with leaving drinking, as well as a lot of other things.
That's
but
right.
Rumsfeld is not particularly religious, right? And so why would he be including all these things on these documents if not to curry favor with the president, or if not to convince the president? Because that's the real question here. Were they including these passages in some way to convince the president, curry the president, whatever it may be?
They could well have been, and that is certainly the position that Robert Draper, who wrote this story and is a very good reporter, took in the essay in GQ. I asked the question, would these reports go to the White House normally? And the answer I got back was, well, they would go into the National Security Council, and presumably they would go to those people who prepare the presidential daily brief, which is the main intelligence report, as you know from our time together at the White House, that the president receives. It's not clear that these would have necessarily gone to the president. It's also not clear that they didn't. But it does raise the question, first, who was involved in the lapse of judgment of mixing religion and intelligence reports? And secondly, were they doing this out of some effort to try to influence in some way people beyond the Pentagon?
Yeah, I mean, we just have to show this one up for the director. Element number 2, if you could just pull that up. The one that quotes from the Old Testament book of Isaiah, we can just put that up. That says, quote, "Open the gates that the righteous nation may enter." And, of course, the image on it, U.S. tanks, of course, moving into Iraq.
And you know, Nora, I think the biggest damage of this could have been had they come out at the time. It would remember at that moment there was this sense that this was a war of crusade in some way.
Yes.
And it certainly would have been enormously damaging had those come out at the time, which makes the lapse of judgment involved here, to my mind, pretty interesting.
Remarkable. Well, I think there's still some more reporting to do on this about just who exactly was putting these quotes in there and
where
these,
they went.
Yeah, and where they went. David Sanger with the New York Times. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.